Tacitus writes with relish that Messalina, disguised as a common woman, sought the company of men in Rome's houses of ill repute. Suetonius amplifies the image of an empress who performed acts beneath her station. Juvenal's satires, meant to sting and to moralize, paint Messalina as emblematic of a ruling class that had lost all restraint. Tacitus, Annals; Suetonius, Claudius; Juvenal, Satire. Pause here. Why would Roman historians invent, or at least inflate, such stories? Several possibilities press on the evidence. Senators who had lost power to imperial freedmen and bureaucrats found a potent narrative in scandal. Painting an empress as sexually voracious made it easy to explain political failures. If the household of the emperor was corrupt, so must be the state. Female sexual license was political shorthand for a breakdown of masculine authority. So while we can reconstruct a compelling nighttime scene, we must also read that scene critically. The details, the disguise, the specific brothel, the exact words exchanged are likely more narrative flourish than documentary report. Still, even as rumor, these stories had real power. They shaped how Romans understood their leadership and how later generations remembered Messalina. If you want deeper dives into Rome's hidden scandals, subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll follow this thread through other infamous figures and the sources that shaped them. The accusations escalate. The tale of Messalina versus Sylla functions both as horror show and political fable. According to the sources, the imperial household staged a contest. Messalina, to prove she could outlast and outperform a famed courtesan, entered a display of endurance that turned private shame into public spectacle. The image is grotesque on purpose, an empress meant to embody modesty and maternal virtue, sending a clear message that the boundaries between aristocratic respectability and street-level debauchery had collapsed. Why tell this story? At the simplest level, it titillated. But at a political register, it performed a demonstration of power that reversed the usual order. An elite woman used what should be shameful to demonstrate who could act with impunity. Whether Messalina actually took part in such contest is less important than the message the narrative delivered to Rome's governors and senators. The imperial household stood above the old rules. From discreet scandals, ancient authors moved to a bolder charge, an imperial brothel. Tacitus paints a chilling picture of a villain near the Campus Martius turned into an apparatus for entrapment and blackmail. According to Tacitus, the narrative goes, Messalina had a villa where men of rank were lured, compromised, and recorded, their shame kept as currency. The details vary between accounts, but the pattern is consistent. Sexual humiliation weaponized to bend the elite to the empress's will. Recreate a plausible scene. A senator, invited to a private dinner, arrives expecting an elegant but discreet gathering. The guests are charming. Wine flows. Then, at some turn, the lights are dimmed, the doors are shut, and the guest finds himself in a room arranged for transgression. An agent of the household appears with witnesses or with evidence. Letters are shown, or illicit trysts have already been recorded. The senator's career now depends on silence or on compliance with favors. This is the mechanism, or rather the mechanism that the sources claim existed. Why would an empress build such a machine? If we accept the narrative, it would be a way to neutralize the Senate and elites who threatened imperial will. A ruler who can hold leverage over magistrates and governors fragilizes the old republican checks on power. But other readings are possible. Modern historians point out the rhetorical function of such tales. They depict a woman's sexuality as a weapon precisely because men feared being reduced to subjects of desire and shame. In a system where the emperor's favor determined careers, allegations that an empress controlled that favor by sexual means gave the senatorial class an explanation for their own marginalization. In short, the brothel story might be true, partially true, or entirely metaphorical, a vivid indictment rather than a blueprinted plan. These scandals did not remain private. The imperial household's network of patronage depended on silence as much as on loyalty. Freedmen, those formerly enslaved who had risen to positions of trust within the palace, acted as intermediaries. Tacitus and Suetonius name them as key players. Men like Narcissus and Pallas are glimpsed in the margins of these narratives, wielding unexpected influence. Tacitus, Annals. They are the figures who could open petitions to Claudius, who controlled access to his ear, who transmitted evidence and counsel. The freedman's power and the strain it put on senatorial pride helps explain why stories that attacked female sexual conduct became so attractive to aristocratic writers. Power, when exercised through shame and secrecy, corrodes institutions faster than overt violence. Magistrates appointed to keep silence, military commands redistributed to survive rumor, provincial governors kept on edge by knowledge that a single scandal could ruin them. These were the political consequences Tacitus insists followed Messalina's alleged schemes. Whether or not every blackmail scheme happened exactly as told, the perception had real effects. The Senate grew wary, the machinery of administration became encrusted with fear, and Roman public life, the forums, the baths, the provinces, felt the pressure. Religion, in Rome, was never wholly separate from politics. Messalina's critics expand their indictment by accusing her of converting sacred ritual into spectacle. According to the sources, festivals of Venus and Bacchus, gods associated with love and wine, were turned into obscene pageants that dissolved reverence into display. Imagine a procession that began as pious, where offerings should have restored pietas, but where the lines between worship and theater blurred until the god itself seemed enlisted in excess. Messalina allegedly took part, not as a modest matron, but as a conductor of spectacle, wearing floral crowns, presiding over rites that stunned and outraged conservative observers. To read such accusations is to perceive a cultural panic. In Roman eyes, religion was a guarantor of civic order. The allegation that the empress had mocked these rituals signaled to moralists a deeper breakdown. If the sacred could be profaned with impunity, what remained? Yet again, we must be cautious. Rituals change. Public performances often hybridized sacred and profane. An empress at a festival, playing a leading role, might simply have exercised the sort of visibility imperial women sometimes held. The choice to turn that visibility into a scandal does as much rhetorical work as it does historical reporting. And then, the climax the sources cannot resist, came the open theatrical rupture that ended years of whispers: Messalina's marriage to Gaius Silius. Gaius Silius, a nobleman and a handsome young senator, becomes in the narratives both lover and pawn. Ancient authors report that while Claudius was away in Ostia or otherwise occupied, Messalina married Silius in a public ceremony. The act was more than adultery, the sources insist. It was legally theatrical, a rival to the emperor, an open affront to imperial authority. Tacitus treats the wedding as both moral collapse and political treason. Tacitus, Annals. Suetonius, whose biographies delight in scandal, frames it as the capstone of a woman who had outstripped every boundary. Let us reconstruct, cautiously, the sequence. According to the sources, Messalina and Silius arranged a marriage in the gardens or in a private hall. The ceremony, whether sincere or a staged charade, was public enough to be noticed. At the very least, its boldness signaled either reckless confidence or calculated provocation. The political stakes could not be ignored. If the empress could put another man in the position of husband, the dynastic order was threatened. Roman law and custom placed enormous value on the imperial household's integrity. A rival marriage was a symbolic coup. The news traveled fast. At the center of the crisis were messages brought to Claudius by his freedmen and palace agents. According to Tacitus, at first Claudius laughed, disbelieving the idea that his wife could commit such folly. But laughter gave way to horror. The freedmen urged immediate action. Soldiers were mobilized. Silius and Messalina were declared outlaws. Execution orders followed. Modern historians debate the precise chronology and motives. Was this a sincere coup? A bid for power? A reckless romance misread by alarmed courtiers? Or was it a plot of palace factions to unseat Messalina and install a more pliant arrangement? The sources do not give us a single reliable blueprint. What we do have is the scene of exposure. Messalina, suddenly aware that the palace has closed in, seeks refuge where she can. Some accounts say she begged for mercy, tried to take her own life with a hairpin or knife, or held out her wrists to a servant. A Roman narrative loves the image of the woman in extremity, pleading with the men whose favors she had once commanded. The execution, when it came, was carried out swiftly. The exact hands that struck vary between reports, a tribune, a soldier, a master of the household, but the result was the same. Messalina died in the gardens of the palace or in an antechamber, depending on which report you trust: Tacitus, Annals, Suetonius, Claudius. Immediately after this violent removal came another form of violence, damnatio memoria. Claudius, or the apparatus around him, ordered a public erasure. Statues were torn down. Names were struck from public records. The state attempted to scrub the stain by making the stain official. Erase the person, control the story. Even so, the story resisted erasure. The very fact of damnatio memoria testifies to the power of scandal. If a memory is dangerous, the state will try to rewrite the past. That attempt, in turn, invites later chroniclers to reconstruct and embellish. The paradox is complete. A woman erased by law survives in scandal. At this point, it is necessary to step back and offer alternatives to the simplest, most salacious reading. Messalina's motives, if any, are contested. The narratives lifted against her assume lust and a desire for rank alone. But consider other possibilities. Perhaps she acted out of political calculation, moving to secure a regime in which her sons or her allies would flourish. Perhaps she was driven by the agency women of her station sometimes exercised, not merely as sexual beings, but as political actors in a male world that limited formal power. Or perhaps she was the victim of slander, targeted by a senatorial class eager to punish the household's freedmen and the bureaucrats who displaced them. Or perhaps she was traumatized, shaped by the pressures of being young, powerful, and constantly observed. All of these readings fit different pieces of the scattered evidence. None of them can be proved beyond doubt. We must also insist on evaluating the sources themselves. Tacitus, writing decades after the events, had a clear aristocratic perspective and an appetite for moral lessons. Suetonius collected gossip and episodes that fit the dramatic arc of a life. Juvenal wrote satire meant to sting and to strike moral chords. Each author performs journalism of a kind, reportage laced with moral commentary. They supply the raw materials of Messalina's legend, but also the motives for its shaping, to explain political failure by personal depravity, to reclaim senatorial honor by castigating a woman, and to warn future rulers against the dangers of household corruption. If this tale is as much constructed as it is factual, why does it still matter? Because it shows how sexualized narratives can function as political weapons. Whether Messalina plotted from her villa, or whether her opponents cast a web of story to snare her, sexual slander did the work of political destabilization. Men lost office, careers were saved or destroyed on the basis of whispered associations. Public confidence in institutions eroded when the private life of the ruler became a theater for rumor. In short, the story of Messalina, true in whole, true in part, or mostly myth, became an instrument of both explanation and control. The end of her life, the arrest, the failed pleas, the execution, the damnatio memoria, plays like a Greek tragedy with Roman civic consequences. After her death, Claudius remained emperor. His reign continued, marked by the same tensions between palace and senate, between new bureaucrats and old aristocrats. The story of Messalina's excesses served to justify the brutal measures taken by power holders and to warn others of the price of stepping beyond prescribed roles. Our final task is historiographical. Damnatio memoriae was meant to delete. But deletion rarely succeeds perfectly. Later historians, scribes, and poets preserved what the law tried to destroy. The scandal endured. That endurance tells us less about the precise actions of a single woman than about the anxieties of a society that took the sexual conduct of elite women as a metric of political health. The sources that survive, those hostile, moralizing voices, become the primary lens through which we view Messalina. We must therefore read them as a mix of testimony, indictment, and cultural artifact. What then is the legacy of Valeria Messalina? She has been branded in later memory as Rome's most perverted empress, a phrase that captures fascination more than fairness. Her story warns us, first, about the ease with which sexuality is weaponized against women in power. Second, about the centrifugal force of scandal in eroding public trust. And third, about the way historical narratives are shaped by those who have motive to defame. Let's end with the scene of erasure one last time. Statues meet the ground. Inscriptions are scraped. The palace doors close on a narrative the state wants to forget. And yet, in the margins of ancient books, in the satires of Juvenal, and in the annals of Tacitus, Messalina's legend persists. It is both a cautionary tale and a mirror. It reflects a Rome where private vice could stand for public failure, and where the sexualized image of one woman could be pressed into the service of political explanation. If you found this exploration compelling, watch our deep dive on Tacitus's biases and the ways Roman historians shaped reputations. It will unpack the methods by which scandal becomes history and how to read those histories critically. Share this with someone who loves Roman intrigue and return for the next episode, where we will trace how Claudius himself became both a reluctant instrument and a survivor of the same scandal that engulfed his household. Rome hid these truths for centuries, but truth has a way of surviving. If you want to uncover more of what was never meant to be told, subscribe and step with me into the next forbidden chapter.